I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com.
So it has been, it's overstated sometimes to say things are dramatic in court terms, but it has been a very dramatic few days in what's been dubbed the Hennessy torture trial. And today the drama increased, I suppose, with the four men that are charged in connection with this offence, all changing their pleas and pleading guilty to I suppose, a lesser charge.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have brothers Jason and Brandon Hennessy, and then father and son Kenneth Fitzsimons and his son Dean, and they were charged among other things. They were all charged with false imprisonment of a man, assault causing serious harm, and for the benefit of an organised criminal gang. And what happened today was the DPP accepted guilty pleas to a Section 3 assault causing harm, which is much lesser. So, I mean, the other two more serious charges would attract up to life. False imprisonment is a possible life sentence. Assault causing serious harm is potentially life as well.
Yeah.
And Section 3 assault is the maximum is 10 years. So it was a good result, I guess, for the Hennessys and for the Fitzsimons today. Of
course, like a similar false imprisonment charge, I think we have maybe the Kevin Lunny abduction, where people were serving 17, 18 years.
But there was actually a 30-year sentence in that case and a 25-year sentence. Yeah. There was some extremely high sentences in that one.
And that's a tradition in Ireland, certainly with tiger kidnappings, which would include that sort of charge. They're very harshly dealt with by the courts. But there is a context in which all of this happened, and that played out over the weekend, some of which we covered last week, where the principal witness, a guy called Barry Moore, this is the man that was tortured in a shed in the back of the Hennessy family home in Corduff. Barry Moore had the word rat branded on him with a cattle prod. I mean, a savage thing to have happened to anybody. In the aftermath of that, he'd end up in hospital and ultimately given a statement to the Gardaí. But he failed to appear in court, I think, 3 times in a row, and ultimately was arrested towards the end of the weekend. Stood up in court and said, "I'm not giving evidence," quite politely, and but told the 3 judges he wasn't. I mean, this is the context in which this I suppose these pleas have been offered and accepted.
Yeah, so I mean, well, it would have been our colleague Owen Reynolds from Ireland International News Agency who went above and beyond duty, going in on Saturday for a hearing because they were trying to facilitate Mr. Moore. Knowing that he was a witness and he was essentially being incarcerated, but he was still a witness, and they were trying to move things on as quickly as they possibly could. So sat on Saturday, but he wasn't going to. There's no way he was going to give evidence. He wasn't going to answer questions. He apologised to the judges, but he just said there was no way he was going to do it. And that ruling was due to happen. Sorry, not that ruling then was happened today, but what happened then on Saturday was that the state asked, could his statement be read in court as evidence, which sometimes happens. It's usually when both sides agree. So obviously this was opposed by counsel for the defence. They weren't necessarily wanted to see this happen, and the judges said they would rule on this then this morning. So it was, suppose, expected that it is quite possible that it would have been accepted. It wouldn't be the first time that a statement would have been accepted like this as evidence in court, and that the trial would continue, possibly somewhat weaker. It would be kind of, I suppose, a gap in the prosecution for the defence to exploit, saying, "Oh, well, we can't cross-examine what exactly was said here."
Exactly. I mean, this would be the key point in a case like this. I mean, we've seen it actually many times in where these statements are they're read into court, but the defence can't get the witness up on the stand and drill into it and cross-examine. So it's kind of a weaker type of evidence. Now, obviously, we heard in the first few hearings when Barry Moore didn't turn up, that the guards stood up in court and said that they had a fear of criminal elements, were applying pressure, and that he was in fear. And so all of that might be heard, that was heard obviously by the 3 judges, and they might take that into account, but it would automatically weaken the case.
Yeah, and I suppose then what happened this morning was that we didn't even get to that ruling. That the counsel for the state at Garnet Orange, and on his feet, said, when the case was due to be heard this morning, he said, look, there's been a development. And it was simply, that was all we got to hear. There's been a development. Can you put it back to 2 o'clock? Because the DPP has to get some documents and certificates ready. So we kind of had an inkling there was going to be a change in the charges, that they'd possibly be arraigned. But you don't know. You're not really sure what's going to happen. So we kind of had to wait till the afternoon. And again, like, we're back at 2 o'clock. And they were asked for more time for matters to be put in place. But he did say at that point that, look, if everything falls into place, the trial won't trouble the court any further. So we pretty much, that was a giveaway at that point, that there was going to be lesser charges pleaded to, and that the trial wouldn't continue as such. Yeah,
because we'd heard on Saturday that the state, or maybe it was Friday actually, the state were saying that, okay, this witness isn't going to give evidence. We still have a statement that might be weaker as a result of him not being able to be cross-examined. But they were putting forward that they could prove the case beyond reasonable doubt anyway, even in the absence of the witness, because they were saying they had obviously the injury suffered by Mr. Moore. I mean, we have pictures of him, no doubt the guards have pictures of them, and they were suggesting that there was CCT images of people coming in and going out, and there was also various other forensic evidence taken from the scene. So the state were going to proceed anyway.
Yeah, they had bloodstains at the scene. They had this branding iron. They found it at the scene as well. So I mean, there was kind of, I suppose, certainly on the face of it, looked like strong evidence. So, I mean, there was a bit of a kind of, I suppose, the formal process was a bit theatrical nearly in the Special Criminal Court today.
Yeah.
So, like, there was a detective sergeant called to the stand, and Emma Ryan, and she gave evidence that she had handed over the charge sheet and explained it to Jason Hennessy, first of all. And then, went through, now there was no, you've been charged, and no reply or anything like that. It was just a matter it had been handed to him. And then there was a solicitor acting for the DPP explained that the DPP had signed a direction to allow this case, which would normally be tried at district court level, to go ahead at Special Criminal Court level. So all of this kind of paperwork was put in place, and it was done one by one. So you had Brandon Hennessy, who just simply said guilty. Jason, when he stood up in reply to the judge, he was asked, "Are you Jason?" And he goes, "I am indeed, miss." And then when he stood up, he said, "How do you plead?" And he says, "Yes, yeah, I am.
Yeah.
In terms of pleading guilty." It was just one word from Dean Fitzsimons and one word from Kenneth Fitzsimons as well. But at the same, like, it took nearly 10 minutes for each one to go through this process. Yeah. And then they still had to be arraigned, where the registrar reads out the actual charges. And again, it's in the very formal way of Section 3 under Offences Against the Person Act and so on. And they, again, that's when they gave that's actually when they gave their guilty plea.
So all four were there. Was Barry Moore there this morning for...
He was described as being in the environs of the court.
Okay.
And the judges at one point, the counsel at one point said, look, Mr. Moore may have an interest in this, and should he be on video link? But he was also represented himself. There was a counsel there to represent his interests, and he said no, he's not interested whatsoever in what was going on inside in the courtroom at that stage.
So the four men were there. What was their demeanour? We've obviously seen them coming in out of court before, looking quite intimidating, I suppose. Were they?
Well, they were kind of dwarfed a bit by the huge phalanx of prison officers in stab vests that came in. I mean, they were vastly outnumbered. There was, all the kind of the court guardie were there, and I think the armed guardie who would be in court, they tend to keep a lower profile, dressed in civvies, but there was a strong guard of presence there. I mean, the only time, like, there was no punch in the air because they're still facing a potential 10-year sentence. I mean, their brother Devon had already pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and to assault causing serious harm in July, in a July hearing. So he was due for sentence today. And so when that came up, like, in between all this going on with a different set of judges, his counsel then asked that look, can his case then be added to the other list, because it looks like, they should all be sentenced together. Yeah. And then at the kind of the final hearing where the four guys were all, arraigned, Devon was actually sitting with them.
Yeah.
So you had the five of them then together, the three brothers and the father and son, the Fitzsimons, who will be sentenced in late January is when they're due back.
Late January they'll all come back.
And there's going to be no victim impact statement either, because the judge was at pains to say, look, Mr. Moore needs to know that he is entitled to make a victim impact statement, and does he understand this? And again, it was emphatically kind of stressed in court, he has no interest in making a victim impact.
And did
statement.
it say if he's now released, or is that maybe there may be some paperwork to go through there?
No, it didn't. I don't think it arose in court today, so I can't answer that question in terms of whether he there was no mention today of him being kept in custody as such. I mean, they talked about him being in protective custody as opposed to incarceration at one point on Saturday, so I can't actually tell you really where he is at this stage.
No doubt if he's not out pretty soon, he will be out. He'll certainly be out for Christmas, one would imagine, if not significantly quicker. Now, the reason, of course, that we're talking about this trial, or the reason that it's in the special criminal court, I suppose, is because of the notoriety, particularly of the Hennessy brothers. There's three of them have been convicted in relation to this offence, but they are very, very well-known criminal figures. And obviously they were at the centre of one of the most shocking incidents just almost 2 years ago as well, when their father was shot dead in Brown's steakhouse on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, Christmas Eve 2023, and there's three guys now serving life for killing Tristan Cherry, who was the gunman who, after shooting Jason Sr., tried to get out the back door, found it locked, and on the way back out was basically beaten to death and stabbed to death.
Yeah.
And so there was three guys who got life sentences, and Brandon got a violent disorder conviction for his part in that kind of chaotic aftermath of the shooting.
So he's already serving that sentence, and presumably that will, the judge will decide if this sentence runs concurrently or consecutively. Brandon would be the younger brother, but the two older brothers, Jason Jr. and Devon, they'd be very well known because of a feud, I suppose, called what was known as the Corduff feud, a sort of complex falling out of a number of criminals in the North Dublin area, some aligned to the Flashy gang, really. The side fighting with the Hennessys would have been allied to the Flashy gang. A lot of some of the footage of this feud, which didn't result in any fatalities, but was very, very violent, and both Dean and Kenneth Fitzsimons would have also aligned with the Hennessys, and both of them were ultimately convicted in relation to a firearms offence in connection with that feud. There would have been a lot of that was captured on Inside the K. I don't know if you remember that, do you?
Yeah. There was some video going around on social media as well. It was reckless stuff when you saw it.
Yeah.
But it must have been absolutely terrifying for people living close to this family. I mean, we saw the aerial picture that was taken of their house with all the kind of bits and pieces of scrap and the large dogs at the house, and it's a frightening, intimidating kind of prospect to be anywhere close to this family.
Yeah, because there was and obviously there's innocent family members who have nothing to do with crime in relation to the Hennessys, but they were in control of, I suppose, a lucrative street dealing operation based around sort of Corduff and Blanchardstown, and they were certainly linked to these widespread drug intimidation, and I suppose you can see the level of violence that was used in this case. That sort of violence was being linked to that gang on the whole.
Yeah, well, I mean, the victim in this case, Barry Moore, he did give a statement to the guards. He spoke to them, I think, the day after when he was in hospital. And, I think the guard gave evidence that, you could clearly see the marks in his face and his back and stomach. This is where they branded him with the cattle iron. And his arm was in a sling. His arm had been broken with this 5-foot steel bar it's been referred to as a breaker bar. But I mean, it went on for an hour.
Yeah.
And I mean, he went there at 6 o'clock in the evening, and he was there to buy a tracksuit, and was talking to Jason and Brandon. And after about 15 minutes, I think he was punched in the mouth. The phone was slapped on the ground, and he was told, you know what this is about.
And this is all some sort of accusation that they'd planted some false information.
Yeah, they were saying. Yeah,
emerged.
Brandon says that he lied to him when he told him that they didn't have bulletproof windows upstairs, and that he knew he'd tell the lads and it would come back to him.
Yeah.
So there was this kind of whole like trying to, I suppose, get to the truth of some sort of leak of information that supposedly put them in danger. He said Jason Hennessy wanted to know who set him up at the Costa Coffee. And as he was doing this, he pressed the hot iron against his head before putting it back on the stove. And he said he was screaming with pain, pleading to be let go. He heard Brandon saying that they should pull down his tracksuit and rape him with a stick. Now, this is all read in evidence, in court from the guard who took the statement. Eventually he was allowed to get up and leave. And in fairness to Devon, early on, when he was when the victim was being hit with this breaker bar by Dean Fitzsimons, he told him, take it easy, or stop, you're going to kill him.
Yeah.
And then later on again, kind of told him to stop and let him go. That as far as you could see, I suppose had gone far enough. So, I mean, I suppose that'll be taken into account when it comes to, his sentencing and his guilty plea. He's probably the least culpable.
Yeah.
If you can be least culpable in a situation like this. I mean, it was a depraved level of gangland violence when you think about it. I mean,
yeah, I mean, you're not. This is. I suppose even the accusation of what he's meant to have told is really quite small sort of scale. So there's a mixture of things here that, while these are probably making a lot of money and making a decent amount of money, it's still quite small scale sort of drug dealing in one way. They're not, importing drugs from Dubai or putting millions aside. They are making a lot of money by most people's standards, but the level of violence that they're using to collect these, to enforce their will, is of a very, very high type. And we've seen this before from other criminal gangs, maybe, for example, the Dundons in Limerick, where, they're inflicting a huge amount of, shootings and life-changing injuries on people for the sake of a couple of €100 sometimes.
Yeah, it's out of proportion, and you suspect that they actually enjoy it and enjoy the fear and, and instilling terror in people. So they have absolute command and absolute control over their little corner of the drugs market, and that's what it seems to be about. I mean, it's you wonder if some of it is recreational violence. I mean, this guy Barry Moore was obviously known to him. He's a pal of theirs.
Yeah,
he's over chit chatting, and then as far as he could see, completely unexpectedly is turned on and put through an ordeal. They were waterboarding. He thought he was drowning. He told the guards that on more than once that he actually thought he was going to die. He wasn't going to get out of there alive, and was told as much as well. And his members of his family were threatened and property threatened with being set on fire. And you can just imagine the kind of level of fear that you'd be put through.
Now, remember, they have this branding iron, this rat branding iron, which it's described in the earlier court appearances how they had a camping stove. So this is all pre-prepared. I mean, this is obviously, somebody's gone out and ordered a rat branding iron and bought, I presume the lads aren't off camping on a weekend, is bought a camping stove for this specific purpose. And, and the other bit of it is, it's so violent because it's not sophisticated. They're doing it in their own property, effectively, in the back of the family home.
No, I suppose there's an element of arrogance there, isn't it? That they were totally assured that there was no way anyone was going to make a statement against them. And, they weren't entirely right, but they weren't entirely wrong either. It looks like, that they've certainly got a lesser sentence than they might have otherwise.
Yeah.
And again, you saw that in the Dundons. There was never really any attempt to hide what they were doing because they felt they had total control through fear of people. And even in prison, their ability to extend that terror, wasn't necessarily lessened until enough members of the gang kind of turned against them and started giving information to the guards and making statements.
Yeah, because these types of criminals, they don't have the lasting power, really, do they? The guys that totally ruled by sort of reckless, wild fear and violence, they're going to be caught. And these guys have been. Now they've, obviously that family, they've lost their father already to this violence, and maybe we'll hear some of that evidence when it gets to the court, but, they've still inflicted a terrible violence on somebody else.
Yeah, well, we'll hear anyway, whatever mitigation is put forward on the 29th, if they're ready at that stage. And I'm sure it'll, as all the good lawyers do, like they'll do their best for their clients, and they will, try and say, not try and say, but they will say, how events that they've been through have affected them and possibly maybe have influenced their behaviour in this case. And, they're particularly stressed or not for whatever reason. And, there'll be the usual kind of element of it wasn't entirely their fault, and they somehow got sucked into something that got out of control.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't buy yourself a rat cattle prod if you're not intending to use it. Maybe a cynic may say.
Well, you never know. You might have one lying around as a kind of a practical joke.
But look, it's quick justice actually as well, because this happened only in February.
Yeah, February 12th. So yeah, we were just chatting about that. Like, I mean, it went through the courts pretty quickly. I suppose they were in custody the whole time.
Yeah.
So that always kind of gives an extra push to court cases. Like if somebody is on bail, that they aren't given the same priority as somebody who is in remand because it's seen as unjust to keep somebody in prison. Obviously, there was actually a bail hearing which I was at early on, and they went through again a lot of the case that was going to be against them. And there was obviously guarded objections that the kind of basically the threat to potential witnesses that they shouldn't get bail, and that was upheld in the High Court.
Yeah, well, it's I suppose it shows that the Special Criminal Court, where there was a huge waiting list at some point, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when you had a lot of the cases connected with the Hutch Kenneth feud going through, and a lot of the people going through that, including the Regency trial, that they've now been cleared, and there's very little dissident IRA trials, so the Special Criminal Court is definitely less full than it was.
But at the same time, like, we're sitting there today, and there was two separate kind of large cocaine importation cases going through the case management of that.
Yeah.
Like one of them involving 8, I think, defendants.
Yeah.
And there was a state counsel who was saying, the case was extremely complex, that involved phone evidence from both Ireland and Europe.
Yeah.
So I think some of these cases are, they're really complex and take a lot of work. Yeah. And like the judge on the panel was saying, like, the court was actually extremely busy and had a lot going on.
Yeah.
I mean, there was another case, there's a guy from Coolock who's charged with, directing criminal activity as well, and possession of large amounts of cash, and there's quite a few other cases coming through.
Yeah.
But I'm sure compared to what it used to be in the past, it's not as chock-a-block, but it's still a busy court.
Well, we'll come back to it in January for sure, and we might even have a longer look at the Brown Steakhouse murder 2 years on as well. So thanks, Eamon.
Cheers, Niall. Always a pleasure.